Welcome to Baby Snugs and Coffee Mugs. I'm Krista.
And I'm Kelsey. We're both labor and delivery nurses from Minnesota. In this podcast, we'll be covering all things pregnancy, delivering in a hospital, and caring for yourself and baby postpartum.
This podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only, so please seek medical advice from your healthcare provider. We are so excited for you to join us, so grab your coffee, snuggle up, and keep on listening.
Cheers!
Cheers! Welcome back, everybody, to episode 1 of Snugs and Mugs.
Let's get into it, huh?
Yeah, we can start her off then.
All right, you guys, we are starting from the beginning.
Like the very, very beginning.
To the part where you bring that pregnancy test home and it turns positive.
And you panic.
And I would have no idea what to do.
Don't feel bad, because I also did not know what to do.
Okay, because I was just going to say I would absolutely be texting, whether it's you or one of my other friends, on what in the world do I do next.
Yeah, I ended up calling the office, got my first positive home pregnancy test, called our clinic, and awkwardly on the phone was like, so I'm pretty sure I'm pregnant and I don't know what to do. Thankfully, the nurse I talked to was super, super sweet. But, so she ended up setting me up to, come in to just verify my HCG. So,
okay.
So with my first one, I actually didn't know my last period. I had recently got married, stopped birth control, and we all know that kind of can throw your body off. So yeah, I really didn't know. And so I ended up doing a blood test with that pregnancy. So I had to go in twice for labs.
Okay. So when you got pregnant, like at home, you called the clinic and the nurse had set up an appointment for you to go in and get labs drawn.
Yes.
Did she ask you on that phone call if you knew your last period?
She did, yes.
Okay, so that probably directs everybody to their next step.
Yes. So because with my first one, I didn't know, that's why we went to the blood test.
Okay.
To check my HCG, which we did twice to make sure it was trending in the upward direction and the right amount.
Okay.
But with my other two, I did know my period. So we were able to just go in and do a urine test to verify that I was indeed pregnant.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So
perfect.
Super easy, but again, you're nervous. It's your first baby.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't really know what I'm doing.
No idea.
Yeah, no clue. So step 1 is you call whatever clinic you're decided to go to, and you figure out whether or not you need to go in and get whatever kind of lab they decide you need.
Okay, that makes sense.
So yeah, that's step 1. And then also with that, once they verify a positive pregnancy test, you kind of start going forward. So first steps for our facility is a nurse visit. So technically this visit is a phone visit, and it's a lot of education.
I bet it is.
Yes. So you go through a ton of different things with that nurse on the phone, and it does take a little bit of time, but it definitely is worth it. So as a lot of people know, there are so many things you can and cannot do, mostly can't do, while you're pregnant.
Yeah.
So this kind of first phone visit is basically a giant list of things you can't do.
Okay, and you have your records pulled up right now.
I do, yeah.
I mean, this is so much information that nobody's ever going to remember this. So I think if we can dive deep so you guys know what to expect, if you're okay with it in your first appointment. Yeah. Over the phone, it sounds like.
Yes, over the phone. So I talked to a wonderful nurse, and we kind of just started going through a list of things of recommendations and what we should start avoiding now that we are pregnant. So kind of the first thing we talked about is altering your diet, which of course everybody under the sun knows you can't eat lunch meat when you're pregnant.
And it's sandwiches.
I know.
It's my favorite food now.
I know. And there is nothing like wanting a Jimmy John sub when you cannot have a Jimmy John sub.
I will say, I think that is every single one of my patients' first meals after they have a baby.
Those are my first meals.
Send their significant other to go get them that damn sandwich.
Yeah, because everybody wants it. Which, also, spoiler alert, I did not know this, but you can heat up the meat
Oh, fun fact, I didn't know this either. And we had a potluck at work, actually. This is a funny story. I made the ham and cheese sliders, like the
Ooh,
famous
yeah.
ones that are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a coworker that was pregnant, and I knew you couldn't eat lunch meat. So
Mm-hmm.
I had left the ham off of like a third of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought it into work, and I was like, hey, I was like, just so you know, this part doesn't have like lunch meat on it. And she's like, yeah, so you can have heated up lunch meat. And I was like, oh no,
Oh.
I'll eat the cheese ones.
Have a warm cheese sandwich. It was a thought that counted.
I thought so.
Oh, funny. So yeah, definitely either heat your meat appropriately or yeah, you cannot have any lunch meat and no hot dogs, which yeah.
That also makes me sad.
I know I like hot dogs with mac and cheese. So yeah, other things, soft cheeses. So blue cheese was just right to my soul.
Okay.
I absolutely love a black and blue burger, and yeah, so that one is also rough for me. No soft cheeses. Also, that's like feta, brie, anything that's unpasteurized.
Those are all the good
ones.
ones.
I know, right? Other than that, cooking any kind of meat. So if you're having like beef or chicken, fish, making sure that you're using a meat thermometer.
Sure.
Because you really want that internal temperature to be accurate.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and then the sad thing, limiting your caffeine intake.
1 coffee a day.
Yeah, which for me being a nurse is real rough. Working straight nights.
And your nights. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, so that 1 cup of coffee a day is, yeah, that's rough for me. But also that includes tea, any kind of like a bubbler. I know we all love bubblers, but yeah, you kind of have to limit all those things. So yeah, that's kind of basically the diet things. Also, if your provider tells you any other things, they might have other recommendations as well of things you can do, but this is just kind of what's on my list.
Yeah.
And then we also then go down to activity. So, of course, we all know when you're pregnant, you kind of have to reel back your activity a little bit. Exercising is super important, but you can't do any like jarring activities. So no more riding horses, no more tubing in the summer in Minnesota. I would skip out on the downhill skiing. So those kinds of things, which
it
seems obvious.
It
but
makes sense.
even if you're great at these things, unfortunately, yeah, just not
You
safe.
don't wanna risk that fall.
And
I'm
no
assuming.
hot tubs, no saunas.
Oh, I did know the hot tub thing.
Yeah, those ones are rough ones because they're fun. But on the plus side, you don't have to empty your cat's litter box. So that's your significant other, whoever else lives with you, they get that job for 9 months.
Those that have cats, that's a good one.
Yeah, so you get to skip out on all those like terrible things. So you basically talk about those things, and then other things you kind of go through is medications, and that's kind of a big one because, of course, when you're pregnant, there's basically really not many safe medications that you can take. Mostly because who's going to test medications on a pregnant person, right?
Sure. I've never thought about it that way, but yeah.
And a lot of them they do know just are really not safe. So I feel like the big ones, like Tylenol is going to be your friend, but again, you can only take so much of it, and you kind of have to monitor how much you are taking because that can affect your liver. So, no ibuprofen, but on the plus side of the no ibuprofen, when you take it after baby, it works like a charm. It really does.
That's fair.
Yeah, you don't take it for 9 months and you don't realize like, oh yeah, this is going to work so much better.
It's a good one.
It is lovely. And then things for like nausea. So things that like I tried, I think once. I didn't like how Unisom made me feel, but the combo of B6 and Unisom for nausea is really kind of the only suggestion they give you in your
I've had a
trimester.
lot of friends take that. Yep.
I am just a little sensitive to that kind of medication, so it made me really, really groggy the next day, and I just didn't care for it. And I have other kids at home, so I'm like, it didn't work for me. I just dealt with the nausea and small little meals, lots and lots of water. And then I felt like sucking on like a little hard candy, that kind of helped with my nausea too, like
sure.
Peppermint candy.
Yeah. And I think they have like ginger flavor out too now that is supposed to be super good for nausea.
Yeah, you definitely can do that. And like they make those little like seasick bracelets.
Oh, yep.
So you can get those as well. So there's definitely things you can do. It's just not a lot of them. And then the big one is constipation, which for somebody who like that's like my least favorite thing of early pregnancy. Like the nausea I can handle, I can deal with, but absolutely cannot handle the bloat and constipation. So Colace, fibers, yeah, that's going to be your friend for that.
Eat all your fruits and vegetables, drink a
Yeah,
lot of water. That'll
definitely.
keep you moving.
Yeah, so you definitely discuss those kinds of medications in this first thing. And then for us, we kind of went over like lists of informational numbers that you get. So I got this huge list sent to me of sorts of like resources that are tied to the clinic in the hospital, but
Okay.
also community resources as well.
Nice.
So we don't live in a huge community. Like obviously there are areas that are much bigger. So I can just imagine the amount of resources that you could have in your community. So just reach out, things that you might need and even things you don't need. Just kind of ask like, what are my options? What are the resources that you guys are giving to people? Like what can I use to help me?
Absolutely.
So those are kind of big ones. WIC is super important. If people haven't heard of that, it just helps women, infants, and children what it's stands for, and that's like a huge social services help that we have in our community, and I know that's like a huge nationwide thing.
It's everywhere, yeah.
So if you feel like that is something that you would benefit from, make sure you ask about that, because that is just a huge resource for a lot of patients we see.
Yeah, I would tell everybody, take the resources that they give you. You don't have to use them. You don't have to use them in the moment, but you might come across a time that you need it. And
yeah,
they are there for that reason.
Exactly. That's a super good point. And then other things I feel like we kind of went over is we kind of went through a little bit of like medical history. She definitely talked a little bit to me, just like certain things like what number pregnancy this was for me, what baby, different things like that. Just kind of like a small general information intake. And that was kind of about it for the nurse visit. And then kind of the end of that visit was setting up what to do next.
Okay.
So for me, my first pregnancy was again slightly different than my other two just because of not knowing my last menstrual period. So I think that kind of will determine how you move forward.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
So what happened with your first pregnancy that was different?
So with her, because I didn't really have that period to give myself a due date from, I had to go in and have like a dating ultrasound.
Okay, and that was after your nurse phone call? Okay.
Yep, so she set up that ultrasound for me when we were on the phone, or sent me to a scheduler who set it up.
Yeah.
And so I was able to go in, I think it was like mid 7 week that I went in with my first one to get an ultrasound so I could have a due date, because we basically were just unsure. So with my other ones, I didn't have to have an ultrasound quite that early because we took my due date from my period.
Okay.
But yeah, with the first one, I had to go in, and that was technically the day of my first visit with my first baby. So I went in, had that dating ultrasound, which I think I was like 7-ish weeks. And this is just a forewarning for some people. You don't always see your baby with the ultrasound right through your abdomen.
Yes, there are 2 different types of ultrasounds that you guys will possibly see.
Yes.
I will let you explain what you had to do, Krista.
Yes. So, unfortunately, for the first one, because you couldn't see the baby well enough through my abdomen, we had to do what's called a transvaginal ultrasound. So there's a nice little wand that goes up in the vaginal canal, and it is able to see the baby, which, again, is not your favorite thing in the world, but we got to see the baby, and we got to see her heartbeat flickering, and were able to check like my cervix and my ovaries. So everything that they needed to be done, you can do either way. But it just was because the baby was still so little.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So that was with my first one. With the other two, I was more like 9-ish weeks with my first ultrasound, and so both of those were done just abdominally.
Okay.
So nothing.
So definitely like depends on your weeks and how early you are. So that makes sense.
Yeah. And again, like my first one, we just didn't have a due date. So really it just was because I needed to like measure out to see when my due date most likely was.
But super good to know that, I mean, you make that first phone call, have in the back of your mind when your last period was. And if you don't know that, just tell them, and that's okay.
Right. Yep. And it's definitely acceptable to not know, because not everyone knows and not everyone tracks it, and that's okay. You don't have to. It's just helpful for them to figure out a due date. But again, there's another option. So, so yeah, that kind of, I guess, leads into your first actual like in-person visit. Which in our facility is typically with one of our midwives, but not necessarily always. But that visit is usually around like the 8-week mark.
Okay. And we have a side, correct me if I'm wrong, but in our clinic, I believe we have OBs, midwives, and nurse practitioners. Is that
We do,
correct?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the first appointment you're saying is most likely going to be with a midwife or even nurse practitioner, possibly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Not necessarily the OB.
Yeah.
Okay.
Typically not. I feel like every once in a while you do see one, but like even like thinking about like what my patients see and what I see when I review their prenatal records, most people do see.
Yeah, I agree now that you say that.
Yeah, they most see like a midwife or an NP or something. So yeah, so that first visit is kind of like a whole kind of intake visit. So it's your first, so imagine your first baby, your first time being in the office, seeing somebody for being pregnant, and it is a lot.
Well, I would imagine it's probably like establishing care with like a primary too. Like you are
Yes.
like touching base on everything.
Yeah. So my best suggestion is go into it thinking like, okay, what am I kind of looking for, or what do I want out of my care in this pregnancy? Like, am I hoping to stick with midwives? Again, this is an option at our facility. Am I hoping to just be with an OB? Do I want to see both of them? Do I not really care who I see? I just want to see somebody who's going to take care of me and has appointments on the days that I'm free. Like, there's no right or wrong answer. It just kind of comes down to what you're kind of thinking, discussing that with the provider you see that day, and then making a plan going forwards. So that's kind of something you want to think about going into the appointment.
Sure.
So yeah, so you get there and you introduce yourself to your provider, and you kind of go from there. So the first thing they kind of do is like kind of take an intake of like your whole entire history. So of course you get your weight and your vital signs done. And then you get all sorts of like history questions. So, do you have any medical history? Do you have any surgical history? As you know,
It's like a fair warning, they will ask you that through the rest of the pregnancy and
for
at
sure.
time of delivery too.
Yeah.
I mean, I've watched our providers ask those questions the day of delivery as well.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So, I'm like, get asked about that. Any kind of family history, if you know you have any kind of genetic history. So some things we kind of look at early on in pregnancy is if you're a carrier for any kind of like disease, disorder. They look at like if you have like a clotting disorder, if you have a bleeding disorder, if you have like if you carry cystic fibrosis, if you carry SMA, which is another disorder that could affect the baby. So there's like a long list of things that they kind of go over. And discuss kind of your options going forward. Like, do you want to do genetic testing? Do you want to do this? So it's kind of a huge intake and like the start of thinking of decisions for the future kind of thing. I feel like other things that you kind of will probably hear a lot about is those normal OB labs. So your first appointment, like after you go through everything with your provider, at the end, they will have you go and get some labs.
Okay.
So again, for our facility, lab testing includes the following. It's not always just those, and it's not always all of those. But here's kind of the list of things that we typically will see. So they do an HIV test, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia. You will get a PAP if you're due. And so these are all things that, of course, would affect either the mode of delivery or like if you had one of these things, could affect the baby coming through the birth canal. So, of course, all of these things are very important to know. So, other things, we always do their blood type. So that's a huge one going into having a baby is knowing your blood type and your RH factor.
Yep.
Which I think we can probably get a little deeper into that during the second trimester, because if somebody is RH negative, they need RhoGAM.
Correct.
So that's usually not until the second trimester, so we can discuss that a little bit more. But if the facility doesn't have your blood type, they will want to know that. If your blood has any antibodies in it. A big one, I feel like, is the vaginitis panel. So
yeah, and this probably will not be your first one you get.
No, and it will not be your last one. I feel like it's so common. Like, I mean, women already have discharge at baseline, but then going into pregnancy, your body kind of goes into overdrive trying to like protect your uterus. And we see so often that people will get just bacterial infections and yeast infections more common. Like, it's just everything down there is so sensitive, and it just is your body's trying its hardest to protect your uterus and your baby.
Exactly. It is super common.
Yeah.
We see it very frequently.
Oh, definitely. We see it all the time. So no, that is very, very common. It is normal. Just get treated and
You did nothing wrong.
No.
That's probably like the best thing we can say right now is
Right.
there's nothing that can cause that.
right. And then I think the other thing that I feel like most people talk about at this first visit is whether or not you want to do the maternity 21. I feel like that is not the most common thing that was in the past, but now, like in our facility, that's your first trimester screening. Like
Yep.
most people get the maternity
I was
21
going to say
screen.
that is very well known now, I would
Yes.
say, in our area, especially with the patients that I see coming in.
Yeah, and the maternity 21, if you don't know, is a non-invasive blood test. So they will draw the mom's blood and they can analyze genetic information that the placenta basically puts into your bloodstream. So certain things that it's looking for is like the different trisomies and then gender chromosomal abnormalities. Those are like kind of the big things. And then you can also find out the gender of your baby.
The
which-
fun part that
Yeah,
everybody
which
loves.
Everybody, I feel like, loves to find out. I feel like I see it so often, and maybe correct me if you think it's different, but I feel like a lot of my patients, if they find out the gender, they find it out in their first trimester because of the maternity 21.
Yep. I was going to say on the maternity 21 now.
Yeah,
It is rare that people are waiting for that 20-week ultrasound, which
Yeah.
I think is what everybody is familiar with.
Right. Yeah. So I feel like this maternity 21 is mostly where people are getting their gender from now. But you do have to be 9 weeks in order to do this test.
Good to know.
So when you're doing your normal OB labs, if you are 8 weeks, you can't do your maternity 21 at that visit. You can do it anytime after 9 weeks.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So say you think, okay, I don't really want to do this. And then all of a sudden you get to be like 16, 17 weeks and you're like, I don't know, we talked about it and we kind of do want to do that genetic screening. And whether or not you want to find out the gender, that's okay. You can still do the screening. There is a little box on the screening form that says, do you want to know the gender of this baby? And you can say yes or no. So
Okay.
it can be totally excluded.
Okay. That makes sense.
Which, fun fact, with my second, at the time, that was not an option. You couldn't not find out the gender. And so I went through my whole entire pregnancy. We got that done at like 20 weeks. So I went through the whole rest of my pregnancy with the gender of my child in my chart online.
Oh my gosh.
And I had no idea. So I looked into my results and my midwife just messaged me and she was like, "Oh, everything looks negative. Like, good news, yay." And it just said like a date and time. And I just thought like, "Oh, that was like the date and time she put that in, right?" And lo and behold, after I had my daughter, I clicked it. Well, here it was a hyperlink and it pulled it up and it was like, you have an XX chromosome consistent with a female fetus. And I was like, that was in there the whole entire time.
You could have known.
I could have known. I didn't want to.
You didn't want to, though.
I could have known it. I'm like, oh, how funny. I just, in my mind, it just wasn't in there. So I just didn't, do any digging. She said it was negative, and I, have a good relationship with her, so I didn't look at it.
Which is, but also so fun. So your midwife knew what you were having. Mm-hmm. That's so fun.
I believe she knew all 3 times.
She probably did.
And I didn't. Actually, I know for sure she knew with our third that it was our third girl because she made the cutest blanket and we use it all of the time and we love it. And yes, it was very much themed for her nursery. She nailed our colors. It is the cutest freaking blanket. I absolutely
amazing.
love it. And then she even made matching smaller blankets for my other 2 girls to use for their baby dolls.
Oh.
Yeah, it is.
That is the most thoughtful thing I've heard.
She is the sweetest. So, so she knew the whole time that we were having girls. She probably just laughed at us every time we left.
That is right. That's a good secret keeper, though.
No, right?
I would slip up for sure.
It's definitely impressive, but so yeah, I'm trying to think what else we even talked about in that first visit. I think that really is kind of it for that 8-week, kind of 8-ish week visit.
Okay.
And then you have one more. You have a 12-week visit.
In your first trimester.
In your first trimester, yep. So the kind of normal, if everything is going smooth, you're kind of low risk at this point, the normal is to be seen every 4 weeks.
Okay.
And that's up to, I think, at least 32-ish weeks. And again, this means everything's going kind of as planned. No extra risk factors, no extra kind of tests or anything that you need.
Okay.
So it's
and your provider will obviously let you know if you need to be seen sooner.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, they definitely will. So then you go to your kind of 12-week visit, and I think at that point, too, is kind of where we started discussing, a little more planning for the future thing. So
okay.
Are you thinking about how you want to feed the baby?
Sure.
who's your support? Who's going to be there for you? Is this person involved in your life? Who's the father of the baby? Like all those kinds of things. I feel like you kind of touch a little bit on the first visit, but again, there's so much going on that like sometimes, some of that's saved for the second visit. And then kind of discussing, okay, are you going to see X, Y, and Z person for the rest of this? Do you want to see a mix of people? You kind of make that plan going
You're
forward.
starting to make decisions at that point.
Yes. Yep. So you go kind of from like, okay, have this in your mind to like, okay, now we're going to kind of like
Dive deep.
Yep. Start setting things up. And like, of course you still have a lot of time. Like you still have a lot of weeks to like make plans, and you can always change your mind, but it's definitely nice to kind of start thinking about it. Like feeding your baby's a big deal. And it's not easy, and making that decision's not easy, and there's no right or wrong answer.
No.
Again, just breast milk or formula. Don't give them anything else. We don't care.
You have one of two choices, but it is such a hard decision.
Yeah, so it's definitely a good idea to start thinking of those things and then kind of planning for like, okay, do I want to do a breastfeeding class? Do I not want to do that? Do I want to do a birthing class? Like kind of all those like early pregnancy things, because it's amazing how quick the pregnancy goes.
I believe that. There is so much to know, and then all of a sudden you're at the end.
Yeah. And like you think you have so much time for everything, and then all of a sudden you're like 36 weeks and you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't do all of these things that I wanted to do. And it just happens really fast. And especially in the beginning, you're so tired, and like the nausea is usually really, really bad in that first trimester.
You're just trying to get through that first trimester.
Yeah. So
I get that.
My best advice is get things ready to do what you need to do in that second trimester. Like the second trimester for most people is like the easy trimester.
Okay.
You feel a little bit better. You're not so tired, but you're also not like 8 or 9 months pregnant and feeling really big and really uncomfortable and everything's stretched out. Like that's usually kind of your golden 13,
I was
12,
like,
13
isn't that,
weeks.
it was called like a thing. It's the golden trimester normally.
Oh,
though,
definitely,
right?
yeah. So another thing at 12 weeks is they might be able to start trying to Doppler the baby. They might not do it at that visit. I feel like there is sometimes, depending on like where you are, if you're a little late on your visit and you're more towards 14 weeks, they might try to Doppler the baby.
Okay.
If you're a little early, it is normal for them not to be able to find the baby on a Doppler. So
early babies are hard to find with a Doppler.
they're little. They're really little, and body anatomy makes a huge difference. So I know for me, I have like a tilted uterus, which I did not know.
Interesting.
Until I think it was not till after my first baby. So honestly, I don't even know if like that's what made it work like different. But with my second baby, I had an anterior placenta, so that means my placenta was in the front. Plus, I had a tilted uterus, so I couldn't hear her on a Doppler really well until like 16 weeks.
Wow, okay.
Like, I could almost feel her moving before we could like really get a good listen to her heart.
Sure.
Without an ultrasound, so.
Stinker.
I know, and she still is like our little stinker. We love her, though. So, second babies. So I feel like that's kind of really the whole gist of that first trimester. Another really, really helpful tool I feel like we have is our facility has an app that you can download that has tons of different education.
Nice.
And like kind of like keeping you on track with things.
Yeah.
So I assume if our smaller community has some sort of app, I would assume bigger communities also have that. So just ask your provider, what do you guys have besides what's going on here that I can be involved with so I can be best prepared.
Yeah. And I would think even like beyond your facility, there's got to be so much apps anyways.
And there's wonderful podcasts like Snugs and Mugs.
Like us.
To kind of keep you on track and just help people through this like crazy time in their life.
A whirlwind of a 12-week period.
Yeah. So it is amazing how quickly things go by, but how slow those days seem. When you're not feeling good and they're long, in the moment you're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be pregnant forever. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I'm in labor, or I'm being induced tomorrow, or my C-section's in a week. Oh my goodness. Like it really does go by fast. So again, I think just being the most prepared that you can early on is just the most beneficial. I
completely agree. And even you touching on classes earlier, if they're not telling you about it, I would definitely ask your friends or family that have done them before. I would say classes are probably one of the most helpful things that you're going to find.
Yeah, definitely. And I encourage all of my patients and people, like friends I know, do those classes. Like even if you feel like you know so much, like maybe your partner doesn't know all those things, or maybe there's things that like happened in your first pregnancy that like say it was a breeze and the second one's a lot more hard. Like you just never know. Like every pregnancy is different, every baby is different, every situation's different, which is part of the reason I love our job.
Yes. I don't think there is one pregnancy out there that's the same.
No, there just really is not. So OB is just this giant world of gray, and it's a lot of learning and a lot of like, well, sometimes this, but other times this.
We never have a straightforward answer, and I think people despise us for that.
Oh, I agree with you, because favorite question, how quick until the baby comes? If I could tell you that, sir or ma'am.
Yeah.
I would have a lot of money.
So much money if I could predict that for you.
But yeah, it's just a world of gray. And the best thing you can do in early on pregnancy while you are not feeling well and you're kind of tied up and laying down and relaxing is figuring out things you can do, like online resources, looking at those classes, figuring out your appointments, and kind of researching and finding the things that you feel like you are wanting to know.
Yes, start doing your research.
Yeah, and I think that pretty much wraps up your first trimester, and thankfully that nausea is probably starting to go away.
I really hope that for everybody.
Fingers crossed. It is not for everyone, unfortunately.
It is not.
But fingers crossed that by next week's episode, you guys are going to feel much better and be in your second trimester, and you are going to be ready for that great few weeks of bliss. I'm going to call it bliss.
You could attest to it.
The calm before the storm.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, we just are very, very excited to have you guys come back next week. We'll dive a little more into the second trimester.
Yeah, next week's goal is second try.
Yeah, and yeah, keep on listening, and we can't wait to talk to you guys again next week.
See you then.